Time for most of us is a river. It flows in one direction, carrying us from a fixed past into an unknown future. We live in the now, a single fleeting moment, a razor's edge between what was and what will be. We trust this process. We build our lives on the assumption that the next second will arrive in an orderly fashion, just as the last one did. But what if that assumption is wrong? What if for some people the river of time fractures? What if the now is not a single point, but a chaotic, overlapping space where the present and the immediate future bleed into one another? It's not a superpower. It's not a gift. It's a glitch in the source code of reality, a permanent, waking nightmare where you are forced to witness every tiny, impending disaster, every dropped glass, every stumble, every fatal mistake, 10 seconds before it happens. Welcome to After Dark Horrors. Tonight's story is not about a haunted house or an ancient monster. It's about a man whose own perception became his prison. We received his testimony as a series of fragmented audio logs, recorded over several years. He wanted his story told, not as a thrilling tale, but as a desperate warning. A warning that our perception of a stable reality is a fragile consensus, and some people, through no fault of their own, fall through the cracks. He asked us to share this with you so that you might understand. So that if you ever see someone flinch at a sound you haven't heard yet, or catch a friend reacting to a joke a moment before you tell it, you don't dismiss it. You watch them, and you wonder what terrible, overlapping world they are forced to live in. So, silence your devices, take a deep breath, and prepare to question the very nature of the moment you are living in right now. This is After Dark Horrors, and this is the story of a man who could see 10 seconds into the future, and the things that saw him looking. It started with a coffee cup. That's what I tell myself anyway. It's the first memory I can isolate, the first clean data point in the chaotic mess that my life has become. Before the coffee cup, things were normal. I was normal. My name is Alex. I'm an archivist at a university library. My life was quiet, ordered, and predictable. I dealt in the past, in dusty manuscripts, forgotten photographs, and the recorded histories of other people's lives. The future was a pleasant, abstract concept, a place I'd get to eventually. I never asked to see it ahead of time. It was a Tuesday morning. I was standing at the kitchen counter, pouring coffee into my favorite ceramic mug, a heavy, dark blue one my sister had given me. It was a simple, mindless ritual I'd performed thousands of times. My hand, holding the hot coffee pot, was steady. The mug was stable on the granite countertop, and then I saw it. Not like a daydream, not like a thought. I saw it. A perfect, crystal-clear image superimposed over my vision. My own hand spasming. The coffee pot tilting wildly. Dark, steaming liquid splashing across the white counter. And the mug, my favorite mug, tipping over the edge, falling in silent, slow motion before shattering on the tile floor. The vision was silent, but my mind filled in the sound. A sharp, percussive crack that I felt in my teeth. The entire vision lasted maybe a second, but in that second, my brain processed every detail. The specific pattern of the splash, the way the mug broke into 3 large pieces and a spray of smaller shards, the way my own body would lurch forward in a futile attempt to catch it. Then, the vision was gone. I was back in the present. The mug was still on the counter. The coffee pot was still in my hand. Nothing had happened. My heart was hammering. A dizzying wave of vertigo washed over me. What was that? A micro-dream? A hallucination? I'd been working late. Maybe I was more tired than I thought. I shook my head, trying to clear the phantom image, and began to pour the coffee, and my hand spasmed. It was a tiny, insignificant muscle twitch in my forearm, a flicker, but it was the exact spasm I had seen. The coffee pot tilted. The dark liquid splashed across the counter in the exact pattern from my vision. The mug tipped over the edge. But this time, I was ready. My other hand shot out, not in a lurch, but in a precise, calculated movement. I wasn't trying to catch the mug. I knew from the vision it would break. Instead, my fingers intercepted it mid-air, my palm connecting with its side, pushing it away from the tile floor and toward the small rubber mat in front of the sink. It landed with a dull, unsatisfying thud. It didn't break, I stood there, breathing heavily, staring at the intact mug on the mat. The coffee was still splashed all over the counter. My hand was still tingling from the spasm, but the mug was safe. A strange, triumphant feeling washed over me. I had seen it. I had seen the future, and I had changed it. It was a fluke, a bizarre moment of precognition, but I had won. I had saved my favorite mug. I smiled, a giddy, nervous energy bubbling in my chest. I felt like I had a superpower. That feeling lasted for about an hour. The glitches, as I came to call them, started small. I'd be walking down the library stacks and see myself trip over a book left on the floor. A second later, my foot would catch on the book, but I'd already adjusted my balance, turning a nasty fall into a minor stumble. I'd be typing an email and see myself make a typo. A moment later, my finger would slip, but I'd already be hitting the backspace key. They were always 10 seconds ahead. Never 9, never 11. A perfect 10-second preview of my immediate future. At first, it was useful. I became incredibly efficient. I never spilled anything. I never dropped anything. I caught every falling pen, sidestepped every puddle, navigated crowded hallways with an unnatural grace. My coworkers noticed. "Wow, Alex, great reflexes," Sarah from Acquisition said one afternoon, after I caught a stack of files she'd knocked off her desk before they even had a chance to scatter. I just smiled. It was my little secret, my superpower. The value loop, as a psychologist might call it, was intoxicating. I was getting constant positive reinforcement for this strange new ability. I felt competent, in control, almost clairvoyant. I was living life with a 10-second cheat code. But then, the nature of the glitches began to change. The payoff structure of my new reality began to reveal its cruel terms and conditions. It started with conversations. I'd be talking to someone, and I'd experience the glitch. I would see and hear their response 10 seconds before they said it. The first time it happened was with my boss, Mr. Abernathy. He was asking me about a missing manuscript. The future vision, silent, superimposed. I see Mr. Abernathy's face, his brow furrowed, his mouth moves. I don't hear the words in the vision, but I know what they are. I see myself nodding, my own mouth forming a reply. "I'll check the secondary archive immediately." Back to the present. The vision vanished. Mr. Abernathy was still looking at me, his mouth just beginning to open. So I need you to check the secondary archive immediately," he said. The words were identical to what I knew he would say. Without thinking, I replied, "I'll check the secondary archive immediately." He blinked. Yes, good. That's what I just said." There was a beat of awkward silence. He looked at me, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. I had responded too quickly. My reply had overlapped with the end of his sentence. It was a tiny social misstep, but it felt jarring. It kept happening. I'd be chatting with Sarah, and I'd see her laugh at a joke I was about to make. Then I'd make the joke, and her laugh when it came felt like a hollow echo of the one I'd already seen. I started responding to questions before they were fully asked. I'd finish people's sentences, not out of impatience, but because I already knew where they were going. People stopped talking to me as much. The conversations became strained. I was always one step ahead, and it made everyone uncomfortable. They couldn't put their finger on it, but they felt it. I was off. I was weird. The man with the uncanny reflexes was now the man who was impossible to have a normal conversation with. My superpower was becoming a social disease. I tried to control it. I'd see the 10-second future, hear the question, and force myself to wait. I'd count in my head, 1, 2, 3, before responding, trying to simulate a normal reaction time. But it was exhausting. It was like trying to walk with a 10-second audio delay. Every interaction became a complex exercise in timing and self-restraint. The natural, easy flow of human connection was gone, replaced by a constant, draining performance. The emotional waves began to shift from exhilarating highs to draining, anxious lows. The joy of catching a falling mug was nothing compared to the profound isolation of being unable to connect with another human being in a genuine way. I was living in a 10-second echo chamber, forever out of sync with the rest of the world. And then, the glitches stopped being about simple actions and conversations. They started showing me pain. I was walking home from work. It was autumn, and the sidewalks were slick with wet leaves. I was approaching a busy intersection. As I stepped off the curb, the glitch hit me. The vision. A cyclist, a young woman in a bright yellow jacket, is speeding down the bike lane. A blue sedan, runs the red light. I see the cyclist's face, a mask of sudden, horrified realization. I see the impact, not in gory detail. My mind, or whatever was showing me this, spared me that. But I saw the bike crumple. I saw the woman thrown through the air. I saw her body hit the pavement with a sickening, silent finality. I saw the blue sedan screech to a halt, the driver's face pale with shock. The present, the vision was gone. I was still on the curb. The blue sedan was a block away, approaching the intersection. The cyclist in the yellow jacket was just entering the bike lane. It hadn't happened yet. I had 10 seconds. My heart exploded in my chest. This wasn't a coffee cup. This was a life. Stop! I screamed, waving my arms frantically at the cyclist. Stop! Car! She looked at me startled, confused by the madman yelling on the corner. She slowed down, pulling on her brakes, her expression a mixture of annoyance and alarm. And because she slowed down, she entered the intersection 2 seconds later than she would have. The blue sedan, running the red light just as I'd seen, didn't hit her broadside. Instead, its front bumper clipped her back wheel. It wasn't the catastrophic impact from my vision, but it was enough. The bike spun out. The woman was thrown, not through the air, but sideways, onto the hard pavement. She landed awkwardly, her arm twisting beneath her. I heard a sharp, ugly snap, followed by a scream of pure agony. People rushed to help. The driver of the sedan slammed on his brakes, his face a mask of horror. I stood on the corner, frozen, the architect of this slightly less terrible disaster. I had saved her life, but I had also in a way caused this accident. My warning, my intervention had changed the outcome, but it hadn't prevented the pain. She was alive, but her arm was shattered. If I had done nothing, she would be dead. If I had been a second faster, maybe she would be fine. I was trapped in a horrifying gray area of partial responsibility. I walked away before the ambulance arrived, my stomach churning. The triumphant feeling of saving the coffee cup felt like a sick joke. This wasn't a gift. It wasn't a superpower. It was a curse, a terrible, intimate viewership of the world's endless small-scale tragedies with just enough foresight to be implicated, but not enough power to truly stop them. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my dark apartment, replaying the incident over and over. The woman's scream, the snap of her bone. I was beginning to understand the true nature of my affliction. I wasn't seeing the future. I was a helpless passenger on a 10-second preview reel of the inevitable. The glitches were becoming more frequent, more vivid. The world was a minefield of impending minor disasters. I saw a child fall off the swings at the park. I saw an elderly man slip on a patch of ice. I saw a dog run into the street. Each time I was paralyzed. Should I intervene? Would my intervention make it better or just different? Different worse? I started staying inside. My apartment was a controlled environment. No falling objects, no busy intersections, no people to be out of sync with. I called in sick to work. I told Sarah I had the flu. I let my calls go to voicemail. For a week, I lived in a self-imposed quarantine. I ate canned soup. I read old books. I tried to create a world so predictable, so boring, that there were no futures worth seeing. And that's when I first saw him. I was sitting on my couch, staring at the wall. It was late, maybe 3 a.m. The only light was the glow from the street lamp outside my window. I was tired, my mind numb from days of isolation. The glitch hit me, not with a jolt, but with a slow, oily slide. The vision. I see the room from my perspective on the couch. Nothing is different. The street lamp still casts long shadows. The books on my shelf are still in their ordered rows. But, in the reflection on the dark screen of my television, I see a figure standing behind me. A man. He is tall and thin, and he is wearing a hat that obscures his face, but I can see his mouth. And he is smiling. A smile that is too wide, too sharp, stretching his face into an impossible predatory grin. He is perfectly still, just standing there in the reflection, smiling at me, the present. The vision ended. My blood turned to ice. I didn't move. I didn't dare. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I was too afraid to turn around. Was he really there? Or was it just a hallucination, a product of my sleep-deprived, terrified mind? Slowly, my eyes drifted to the dark television screen. I stared at my own faint reflection. The empty space behind my couch. There was no one there. A wave of relief, so powerful it almost made me sick, washed over me. It was a dream, a waking nightmare. I was cracking. The isolation, the fear, it was making me see things. I took a deep, shuddering breath. I had to get a grip. I had to get out, see people, ground myself in reality. I stood up, my legs shaky, and turned to face the empty room behind my couch. And on the floor, exactly where the smiling man would have been standing, was a single small object that hadn't been there before. A small, old-fashioned brass button, the kind you'd find on a long coat. It was real. The button was real, which meant the vision, the reflection. It wasn't just in my head. My 10-second window into the future wasn't just a passive observation anymore. It was a two-way street. I wasn't just looking at the future. Something in the future was looking back. The brass button was a turning point. It was a physical object, a piece of evidence that had crossed over from the 10-second vision into my reality. Before the button, I could rationalize my experiences. The coffee cup was a coincidence. The social awkwardness was my own anxiety. The cyclist's accident was a tragedy I had merely witnessed and slightly altered. But the button was impossible. It was a calling card left by a phantom. I didn't touch it. I stared at it, this small circular piece of metal sitting on my hardwood floor, and felt a new kind of fear. This wasn't about precognition anymore. This wasn't a neurological quirk. This was an intrusion. The smiling man in the reflection wasn't a hallucination. He was a trespasser. And my gift was the unlocked door he had walked through. My self-imposed quarantine was no longer a sanctuary. It was a cage. I was trapped in my apartment with the knowledge that I was not alone. The glitches continued, but now they were laced with a new, predatory quality. I would see myself walking to the kitchen, and in the reflection of the microwave door, I'd see the tall man in the hat, standing in the hallway, his smile wider than before. I'd see myself brushing my teeth, and in the bathroom mirror, he'd be there, just behind my shoulder. He never appeared in my direct vision, only in reflections, mirrors, dark screens, polished surfaces, even the pupils of my own eyes if I looked closely in the mirror. He was a ghost in the glass, a spectator to my life, and he was always smiling. He never moved. He never spoke. He just stood there, a silent, grinning sentinel in my 10-second future. And after each vision, I'd find another small token left behind. A single black thread on the carpet, a faint scent of ozone and dry leaves in the air, a smudge on a window pane that, when viewed from the right angle, looked like a partial fingerprint, too long and thin to be human. Sleep became my enemy. I was terrified to close my eyes, afraid of what I might see in the dark reflections of my own mind. When I did sleep, my dreams were of him. I dreamt I was in a hall of mirrors, and every reflection was him, smiling, his face getting closer and closer until the mirrors cracked. I'd wake up screaming, drenched in sweat, my heart pounding. I had to get out. I had to find answers. The isolation was feeding the phenomenon, making it stronger. I needed to reconnect with the world, even if it meant facing the awkward, disjointed reality of my 10-second delay. My first step was returning to work. The library, with its quiet order and its focus on the past, felt like the safest place I could be. It was a fortress of recorded, unchangeable history. The return was as difficult as I'd feared. The conversations were a minefield. I tried my best to act normal, to time my responses, but I was clumsy. I could see the frustration and confusion on my coworkers' faces. Sarah tried to be kind, but even she started keeping her distance. I was becoming a ghost in my own life, haunting the periphery of social circles I used to belong to. But the library offered something more valuable than social interaction: information. As an archivist, I had access to databases, old newspapers, and obscure journals that no one else ever looked at. My professional life was about finding patterns in the past. Now, I had to apply those skills to my own terrifying present. My search began with a simple keyword: 10-second precognition. The results were mostly junk. New Age forums, articles about psychic phenomena, debunking websites. But I dug deeper, cross-referencing with terms like sensory echo, temporal displacement, and perceptual paradox. Days turned into weeks. I spent every spare moment, every late night, digging through the digital stacks. I was living on coffee and adrenaline, my eyes burning from staring at microfilm readers and computer screens. The glitches continued. The smiling man was a constant presence in the reflective surfaces of the library. The glass on the display cases, the polished brass railings, the dark screens of powered-down computers. He was watching me work, watching me search for him. His smile seemed to grow more amused with each passing day. Then, I found it. It was a post on an obscure defunct forum from the late 1990s, a message board for people with anomalous perceptual experiences. The forum was called the Echo Chamber. Most of the posts were what you'd expect, people claiming to see ghosts or have prophetic dreams. But one thread, started in 1998, caught my eye. The title was The 10-Second Lag. My heart stopped. I clicked on it. The original post was by a user named Cassandra27. Subject, The 10-Second Lag. Posted by Cassandra27 on 11/03/1998. Does this happen to anyone else? For the last few months, I've been seeing things before they happen. Not big things, just small stuff. I see the cup fall before it falls. I hear the phone ring a moment before it rings. It's always about 10 seconds. It's driving me crazy. I can't talk to people anymore. I feel like I'm living on a tape delay. Am I going insane? The replies were mostly dismissive. People telling her she was stressed, that it was just déjà vu. But then another user reply by, glitch in the Matrix on 11/5/1998. It's not déjà vu. I have it too. Started 6 months ago. 10 seconds exactly. Have you seen them yet? The ones in the reflections? My blood ran cold. I scrolled down, my hand trembling. Reply by Cassandra27 on 11/05/1998. Them? What are you talking about? Reply by glitch in the Matrix on 11/06/1998. The Watchers. The Smilers. They only show up in mirrors, windows, dark screens. They're not there in reality, but they're there in the 10-second future. They're watching us. I think our gift is what lets them see us. We're like a window for them. Reply by Cassandra27 on 11/07/1998. Oh my God, I saw one last night. In my bathroom mirror. It was wearing a hat. It was smiling at me. I thought I was having a breakdown. Who are they? What do they want? The thread continued for pages. More users joined in, maybe 5 or 6 in total, all describing the exact same phenomenon. The 10-second glitch, the social isolation, and the smiling watchers in the reflections. They called them the glitches, or the static. They were a small, terrified community, finding solace in the fact that they were not alone in their specific brand of madness. They shared their experiences, their theories. One user, a physics student, speculated that they weren't seeing the future, but that their consciousness was somehow receiving data from 10 seconds ahead, creating a perceptual paradox. He believed the glitches were extra-dimensional entities that were drawn to these paradoxes, like insects to a light. They fed on the temporal energy, the friction created when two timelines, the perceived future and the actual present, collided. Our reactions, our attempts to change the future we saw, were the main course. Another user, a history teacher, had found older accounts, stories from the early 20th century about people with the sight who were driven mad by mirror spirits, or men in the glass. A diary from a woman in the 1920s describes seeing a terrible, smiling man in the looking glass moments before a vase fell off her mantelpiece. The more I read, the more a horrifying picture began to form. This wasn't new. This was an ancient parasitic relationship, a rare human affliction that turned certain people into unwitting beacons, broadcasting a signal across dimensions, and we, the broadcasters, were the prey. The thread ended abruptly in early 1999. The last post was from the original user, Cassandra27, subject the 10-second lag. Posted by Cassandra27 on 02/12/1999. He's not just in the reflections anymore. I saw him today, in the real world. Just for a second. He was standing across the street, smiling at me. Then he was gone. Glitch in the Matrix was right. The window is getting wider. They're learning to cross over. I don't know what to do. I'm going to try something. There's a local legend about a place, a quiet spot where perception gets fuzzy, where time doesn't run straight. I'm going to go there. I'm going to try to disconnect. If I don't post again, it either worked or it didn't. Goodbye. She never posted again. None of them did. The forum went silent. A quiet spot. The phrase echoed in my mind. It felt significant. But where? How? I spent the next week trying to find any information about Cassandra27 or the other users. Their profiles were anonymous. Their email addresses were long dead. It was a digital ghost story, a dead end, but they had given me a name for my tormentors, the glitches, and they had confirmed my deepest fear. I was not just being watched, I was being studied, and the barrier between their world and mine was thinning. The glitches were getting worse. The smiling man was no longer just a static figure. In my 10-second visions, I'd see him take a step closer. I'd see him tilt his head, his smile widening. The objects he left behind became more personal. One morning, I found a single gray hair on my pillow that was not my own. Another time, I found a train ticket from 1954 sitting on my kitchen table. He was leaving pieces of his world in mine, or pieces of other worlds he had visited, other lives he had consumed. The advanced psychology of my situation was becoming clear. The glitches were using classic psychological warfare, isolation, sleep deprivation, gaslighting me into questioning my own sanity. The constant, low-level stress was wearing me down, making me more vulnerable. I knew I was on a clock. Cassandra27's last post was a chilling premonition of my own future. The glitches would eventually learn to cross over fully. What would happen then? Would I just disappear? Would I become one of them? A smiling phantom in someone else's reflection? I had to find a quiet spot. I had to learn how to disconnect. My research shifted. I stopped looking for other victims and started looking for a solution. I searched for folklore, urban legends, and historical accounts related to quiet spots, places where time runs slow, perceptual dead zones. I found stories from all over the world. A forest in Japan where compasses spin wildly and people lose all sense of time. A stretch of highway in the American Midwest where drivers report hours of lost time. A remote village in the Andes where the inhabitants claim to live outside the river of time. These places were often associated with strange geological formations, high magnetic fields, or historical events of great trauma. They were glitches in the fabric of the world itself. Places where the normal rules of physics and perception seemed to break down. I needed to find one. I needed to get there. I cross-referenced my search with local geography and history, and I found a candidate, a place just a few hours' drive from my city. It was an abandoned industrial complex, the old Northwood chemical plant. It had been shut down in the 1970s after a series of chemical spills and a catastrophic industrial accident that had killed a dozen workers. The place was a toxic wasteland, fenced off and forgotten, but the stories surrounding it were what drew me in. Locals called it the static zone. People who trespassed on the property reported strange phenomena. Radios would fill with white noise. Digital watches would reset. People would experience profound disorientation and memory loss. They'd wander the grounds for what felt like minutes, only to emerge hours later. And the reflections, that was the detail that made my blood run cold. Multiple accounts from urban explorers and ghost hunters mentioned that reflections in the static zone behaved strangely. Puddles of water wouldn't reflect the sky correctly. Pieces of broken glass would show distorted, delayed images. One explorer wrote on his blog, "It was like looking at a reflection with a 10-second lag." This was it. This was my quiet spot, a place where the normal flow of perception was already broken. A place so saturated with its own static that it might just drown out the signal I was broadcasting. I made a plan. I took a week of unpaid leave from the library, telling Mr. Abernathy I had a family emergency. I packed a bag with supplies, water, food, a first aid kit, a compass, and an old wind-up analog watch. No digital devices, nothing that could be easily hijacked. I also packed the brass button, the first token the smiling man had left me. It felt important, like a piece of the puzzle. As I was about to leave my apartment, the glitch hit me one last time. The vision. I see myself standing at the door, my hand on the knob. In the reflection on the dark screen of my phone lying on the table, the smiling man is there, but he's not behind me anymore. He's standing right next to me. He raises a long, thin finger and slowly, deliberately, shakes it from side to side, as if telling me, No. His smile is gone, replaced by a look of what I can only describe as hungry disappointment. The present. The vision faded. He didn't want me to go. He didn't want me to disconnect. He was feeding on me, and he wasn't ready to let his meal walk away. That was all the confirmation I needed. I left my phone on the table, walked out the door, and didn't look back. I was going to the static zone. I was going to unplug myself from the future or die trying. The drive to the Northwood chemical plant was a journey into a different kind of silence. For 3 hours, I drove away from the city, the dense urban landscape giving way to sprawling suburbs, then to lonely highways cutting through flat, empty farmland. With every mile, I felt the oppressive weight of the city's reflective surfaces, the endless windows, the polished cars, the dark screens of a million devices, receding. It was like pulling myself out of a spider's web, thread by painful thread. I had left my phone, my laptop, my digital watch, everything. My only companions were a paper map, the supplies in my backpack, and the constant low-grade hum of my own anxiety. The glitches didn't stop. On the contrary, they seemed to intensify, as if the entity I was connected to could sense my departure. I saw phantom cars swerve into my lane 10 seconds before the road was clear. I saw birds fly into my windshield that were never there. I saw my own reflection in the rearview mirror, and behind me, in the empty back seat, the smiling man sat, his hat pulled low, his impossible grin a fixed point in the shimmering heat of the afternoon. He was no longer just watching, he was projecting. He was trying to scare me into turning back. I kept driving. The turnoff for the plant wasn't on my map. It was a ghost road, an unmarked strip of cracked asphalt disappearing into a thick line of overgrown woods. The locals knew it, I assumed, and knew to stay away. As I turned onto it, the radio, which had been playing classic rock, dissolved into a wall of pure hissing static. Not the intermittent static of a weak signal. This was a solid, unwavering roar, as if the air itself was screaming white noise. I turned it off. The silence that rushed in was heavy. Dead. The road ended a mile later at a chain-link fence, 10 feet high and topped with rusted barbed wire. A faded, peeling sign hung crookedly from the gate. Northwood Chemical. Trespassers will be prosecuted. Danger. Unstable structures and hazardous materials. This was it. The static zone. I parked the car under the cover of some trees, grabbed my backpack, and approached the fence. The air felt different here. Thicker. There was a faint metallic tang to it, the smell of old rust and ozone. It reminded me of the scent the smiling man sometimes left behind. I looked at my reflection in the car window. For the first time in weeks, there was nothing behind me, just the empty woods. A small flicker of hope ignited in my chest. Maybe this place really could blind him. Finding a way in was easier than I expected. A section of the fence had been crushed by a fallen tree years ago, creating a gap just wide enough to squeeze through. As I stepped onto the property, the world seemed to tilt for a moment. A wave of dizziness and disorientation washed over me. It felt like stepping off a moving walkway onto solid ground. The very laws of perception felt different here. I checked the analog watch on my wrist. The second hand was moving erratically. It would tick forward 3 seconds, then stop, then jump forward 5, then tick backward 1. My compass, when I pulled it out, was useless. The needle spun lazily, unwilling to commit to a direction. Cassandra 27 was right. Time and space were broken here. The plant itself was a cathedral of rust and decay. Huge skeletal structures of steel reached for the overcast sky like the ribs of a dead leviathan. Buildings with shattered windows stared out like hollow eye sockets. Nature was trying to reclaim the land, with vines crawling up smokestacks and saplings pushing through cracks in the concrete. But it was a sickly, mutated kind of nature. The leaves on the trees were a strange yellowish color. The ground was stained with chemical rainbows. I needed to get to the heart of the complex, to the place where the static would be strongest. According to the old newspaper articles I'd read, the epicenter of the 1974 disaster was Building C, the primary synthesis and processing facility. That was my destination. As I navigated the maze of decaying buildings and rusted pipes, the glitches in my perception began to change. They became unreliable, fractured. I had a vision of a piece of rebar falling from a rusted catwalk above me. I flinched, jumping back, waiting for the impact. Nothing happened. The rebar remained firmly in place. 10 seconds passed. 20. A full minute. The future I had seen failed to materialize. For the first time in months, a glitch had been wrong. The relief was quickly replaced by a new kind of fear. My curse had become a part of me. I had learned to live with it, to navigate its terrible rules. It was a faulty compass, but it was the only compass I had. Now in this place, it was broken. I was truly blind, unsure if the future I was seeing was real or just a phantom echo generated by the zone itself. I kept moving, my senses on high alert. The silence here was profound. It wasn't the empty, draining silence of my apartment. It was a dead silence, thick and absorbent. Sounds didn't travel. The crunch of my boots on the gravel seemed to die the moment it was made. When I coughed, the sound was swallowed by the air, with no echo, no reverberation. It was like the entire complex was wrapped in acoustic foam. Then I saw it. A large puddle of oily, stagnant water had collected in a depression in the concrete. I glanced at my reflection as I passed, and I stopped dead. The reflection was wrong. In the real world, the sky above was a uniform, gray sheet of clouds, but in the puddle, my reflection was staring up at a brilliant, clear blue sky. I looked up, still gray. I looked back down. The reflection showed a perfect summer day. I waved my hand over the puddle. My reflected hand waved back, but there was a noticeable delay, maybe a full second or two. It was like watching a bad video stream. This was it. The perceptual lag, the static. This place was a natural amplifier for the very thing that was haunting me, but it was also a scrambler. It was a place of immense temporal noise. My hopes surged. If I could find the epicenter, maybe I could use this place's natural static to sever my connection to the glitches, like hiding a single radio station in a blast of white noise. I found Building C at the center of the complex. It was a massive, windowless cube of concrete, stained dark by decades of chemical rain. A huge section of one wall had collapsed inward, the result of the explosion in '74. It was a gaping wound in the side of the building, a dark maw that promised nothing good. This was the entrance. I took a deep breath, pulled out my flashlight, and stepped inside. The air was cold and still. The interior was a vast, cavernous space, filled with the hulking, silent shapes of industrial machinery. Catwalks crisscrossed the darkness above like spiderwebs. Everything was coated in a thick layer of dust and chemical residue. My flashlight beam cut a lonely path through the gloom. The glitches intensified, but they were broken, nonsensical. I saw a vision of myself turning a corner and finding a clear path. When I got there, the path was blocked by a mountain of collapsed debris. I saw a future where a flock of pigeons burst from a high window, but all the windows were sealed. The static zone was showing me futures that couldn't happen. Futures of the building as it once was, ghosts of time layered on top of each other. I was walking down a long, central corridor, my light dancing across rows of rusted lockers, when I saw a piece of broken mirror hanging on a wall. I instinctively looked away, not wanting to see the smiling man, but my curiosity got the better of me. I forced myself to look. In the 10-second vision, he was there. The tall man in the hat, standing behind me, but he was distorted. His form flickered and broke apart, like a bad television signal. The static of this place was interfering with him. He couldn't get a clear lock. His smile, for the first time, was not a perfect, sharp grin. It was a wavering, glitching line. He looked frustrated. I felt a surge of defiant energy. "Not so easy in here, is it?" I whispered to the empty corridor. The vision ended. I looked at the real mirror. My reflection was alone, but on the floor beneath it, a fresh brass button lay on the dusty concrete. He was still connected, weakened, but still here. I pushed deeper, following the signs toward the primary control room. This had to be the epicenter, the place where the accident happened, the heart of the static. The door to the control room was a heavy steel blast door, slightly ajar. It had been warped by the explosion, its edges melted and twisted. I squeezed through the gap. The control room was a scene of frozen chaos. It was a large, circular room with a bank of control panels forming a ring around a central observation window. The window, which must have once looked out onto the main processing floor, was now a gaping hole. looking out into the dark, cavernous interior of the building. The control panels were a wreck. Dials were shattered, levers were bent, screens were cracked. But the most striking feature was the crystalline growth. A strange black glassy substance like obsidian had erupted from the main control panel, the one at the center of the ring. It had spread across the floor and up the walls, forming intricate fractal patterns. It looked like a frozen explosion of black glass. It was beautiful and deeply wrong. I approached the central panel. This was the source. I could feel it. The air here hummed with a palpable energy, a low-frequency vibration that made my teeth ache. It was the same feeling as the hum from the VHS tape, but 1,000 times stronger. Scattered across the floor were papers, old, yellowed logbooks and clipboards, miraculously preserved in the dry, still air of the room. I knelt down and picked one up. It was a maintenance log, dated the week of the accident in 1974. I shone my flashlight on the page. The handwriting was hurried, panicked. October 29, 1974. Another incident in Sector Gamma. Henderson swears he saw the pressure gauge drop to 0 5 minutes before the alarm went off. Says he warned everyone, but no one listened. Management is calling it mass hysteria caused by chemical fumes. I flipped the page. October 30th, 1974. It's getting worse. We're all seeing things, little things. A wrench falling before it's dropped. A warning light flashing on the panel before the circuit overloads. It's like the whole plant is living a few seconds ahead of us. Some of the older guys are calling it the static. They say this land has always been strange, that the plant was built on bad ground. My heart was pounding. It was the same affliction, the same 10-second curse. It wasn't just me. It wasn't just Cassandra 27 and her small group. It was a phenomenon tied to specific locations. This place wasn't just a scrambler, it was a generator. I read the final entry, dated the day of the explosion. October 31st, 1974. Halloween. The static is unbearable today. We're seeing full-body apparitions and reflective surfaces. Tall men in old-fashioned clothes, smiling at us from the chrome panels. They seem hungry. The core reactor is unstable. The pressure readings are fluctuating wildly, but the system diagnostics say everything is normal. It feels like the machine is fighting itself, like two different timelines are trying to occupy the same space. We're shutting it down. We have to... The entry ended there. The ink smudged, as if the writer had been thrown from his chair. They hadn't been driven mad by chemicals. They had my curse. The plant, built on this quiet spot, had amplified the effect, and the complex machinery, the feedback loops, the electrical systems, it had all created a massive, unstable temporal paradox. The explosion wasn't a chemical accident. It was a temporal one. A rupture in the fabric of time and the glitches. They had been drawn to it like moths to a flame. They had been feeding on the chaos, on the dying moments of those workers for decades. I understood now. This place wasn't a cure. It was the source of the disease. I hadn't come here to hide. I had walked into the lion's den. The smiling man wasn't weakened here. He was home. As that realization crashed down on me, the most powerful glitch I had ever experienced hit me. It wasn't a flicker. It was a full, immersive 10-second displacement, the vision. The world dissolved into a blinding white light. The hum became a deafening roar. I was standing in the control room, but it was different. It was pristine, new. The year was 1974. Workers in hard hats were shouting, running, their faces masks of panic. Alarms were blaring. The central control panel was glowing cherry red. And standing beside me, looking not at the chaos but directly at me, was the smiling man. He was solid, real, not a reflection. He raised a hand and pointed at the observation window. I looked. On the other side of the glass, on the main processing floor, I saw them, dozens of them. Tall, thin figures in old-fashioned coats and hats, their faces stretched into identical predatory smiles. They were walking through the facility, untouched by the chaos, their forms flickering like bad reception. They were feeding. Then, the smiling man turned his gaze from the window back to me. He was no longer smiling. His expression was one of cold clinical assessment. He opened his mouth and a sound came out. Not a voice, but a chorus of static. the sound of 1,000 radios tuning at once. And from that static, a single clear word emerged, spoken in my own voice. Welcome, the present. The vision shattered. I was back in the ruined control room. The silence rushed back in, more profound than before. My body was trembling uncontrollably. I had seen it. The moment of the accident. The moment the glitches had broken through, and they had been waiting for me. They knew I was coming. My outro strategy for this terrible chapter of my life had been to disconnect. But the story had a different ending in mind. This wasn't an exit. It was an invitation. I heard a sound behind me. It wasn't a footstep. It wasn't a voice. It was the sound of a radio, slowly tuning between stations. A soft, scratching, electrical hiss that grew steadily louder. I knew, with a certainty that went deeper than any 10-second vision, that I was no longer alone in the control room. Slowly, I turned around. Standing in the doorway, where the blast door had been, was a figure. It was man-shaped, tall and thin, but it had no substance. It was made of shimmering, transparent heat haze, a distortion in the air. Inside its form, I could see the corridor behind it, warped and bent as if seen through thick, imperfect glass. It had no face, no features, just a constant shifting visual static. It was one of them. It had crossed over. It raised an arm, a limb of pure distortion, and pointed at me. And from the center of its form, the chorus of static coalesced once more into a single, terrifying word, spoken again in a perfect mimicry of my own voice. Found. Time, for me, had fractured into a 10-second loop of terror. But in that moment, standing in the ruined control room of the Northwood chemical plant, facing a creature made of pure temporal distortion, time stopped altogether. The glitches ceased. The 10-second previews vanished. There was only the now, a terrifying, eternal present shared with this impossible entity. The creature of static stood in the doorway, its form a constant shimmering ripple in the air. The sound it emitted, that chorus of radio noise, was a physical pressure. It wasn't just a sound. It was the sound of reality fraying at the edges. The word it had spoken, found, hung in the dead air. A death sentence delivered in my own voice. My survival instincts, honed by months of anticipating minor disasters, screamed at me to run. But where? I was in the heart of its nest, the epicenter of the very phenomenon that had drawn it to me. Running was pointless. This wasn't a physical threat I could dodge. This was a predator of perception. I did the only thing I could think of. I stood my ground. I met its featureless, shimmering face and held its gaze. "What are you?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. The static creature tilted its head, a gesture of curiosity that was chillingly human. The radio tuning sound intensified, and from the noise, more words emerged, stitched together from 1,000 different sources. It was like listening to someone spin a radio dial, catching snippets of broadcasts from across time. "We are the static listeners," the old-timey announcer voice, kind audience, to the Harald's voice, echoes. The voice was a collage, a ransom note of stolen sounds. It was using fragments of broadcasts it had absorbed over the decades to communicate. It was a parasite, not just of time, but of information. The echoes. "You mean the glitches?" I asked, my mind racing. "The 10-second future? That's you? You're showing me those things?" The creature's form shimmered violently. The static sound took on a new tone, something akin to amusement. "We do not." "Static? Show you?" Operatic singing. "See. You are the news anchor voice, transmitter, the static beacon, your mind." Hiss. It rings like a bell across the sound of rushing wind. Static. I was a transmitter, a beacon. My brain, for some unknown reason, was broadcasting a signal into their dimension. The 10-second visions weren't something they were sending me. They were a side effect, a feedback loop, my own future, echoing back at me from their reality. "And the smiling man?" I asked, my voice tight. "The one in the reflections?" The creature went perfectly still. The static sound dropped to a low, menacing hum. "The static curator, he," whisper, "enjoys the sound of laughter. Reflections, a window to watch the sound of a ticking clock. Performance?" The curator. The name sent a shiver down my spine. It implied purpose, intelligence, and a terrifying sense of ownership. The smiling man wasn't just a passive observer. He was a collector, and I was his latest exhibit. The static creature took a step into the room. It didn't walk. It flowed like a heat haze pouring over the dusty floor. With each step, it left behind a faint, shimmering afterimage that faded after a second. It was moving through time as much as it was through space. "What do you want?" I demanded, taking a step back. The collage of voices answered, the tone becoming more insistent, more hungry. The static paradox. The game show host voice. Grand prize. When you static, change it. The sound of a small bell. Friction. The sound of tearing paper. Energy. It is, woman's voice sighing. Delicious. The friction. The energy. They were feeding on my attempts to alter the future. Every time I caught a falling cup, sidestepped a puddle, or shouted a warning, I was creating a paradox. A moment where the foreseen future and the actual present diverged. And that divergence, that friction, was their food. My superpower wasn't a gift. My curse wasn't a curse. It was a farming tool. I was their livestock, and my free will was the crop they were harvesting. The horror of that realization was absolute. My entire life for the past few months had been a performance for their consumption. Every moment of panic, every small victory, every gut-wrenching choice had been a meal for these perceptual vampires. The creature flowed closer. It was now only 10 feet away. The air around it was cold, and the metallic smell of ozone was overpowering. "So you brought me here," I said, the pieces clicking into place. "You led me here. Why? Is the energy stronger at the source?" The static source is sound of an explosion. Damaged. Broken. The preacher's voice. "Great feast is over now. Only sound of dripping water. Echoes. But you are static. New. You are sound of a power generator humming. Strong. Static. New source." They weren't just feeding on me. They wanted to turn me into a new epicenter. A new static zone. A mobile, self-sustaining paradox generator. They wanted to hollow me out and make me their new home. The creature raised its shimmering arm again. I knew, with chilling certainty, that if it touched me, it would be over. It would merge with my perception, and I would become a permanent walking glitch in reality, a ghost in my own body. I scrambled backward, my eyes darting around the ruined control room, looking for an escape, for a weapon. But what weapon works against a creature made of time and static? My backpack. My hand fumbled for the zipper. The water bottle? The first aid kit? Useless. Then my fingers closed around it. The old wind-up analog watch. An idea born of pure desperation flashed in my mind. This creature, this place, it was a temporal anomaly. It thrived on digital signals, on the precise, ordered march of electronic time. That's why digital watches reset here. But an analog watch, a mechanical device, it ran on a different system, a physical system of springs and gears. It was a piece of old-world linear time. And what about the other thing? The brass button, the first gift from the curator. It was a physical object that had crossed over, a bridge between their world and mine. The creature was almost upon me. I could feel the cold radiating from it, a cold that felt like the heat death of the universe. I pulled the analog watch from my backpack. I held it up, its steady, rhythmic ticking a tiny, defiant heartbeat against the creature's chaotic static. "You feed on paradox," I said, my voice shaking but loud, "on the friction between what I see and what I do. But what if there's no friction? What if I just agree?" The creature paused, its form wavering. The collage of voices was silent for a moment, replaced by a questioning hiss. "I can't stop seeing the future," I continued, thinking aloud, my mind racing faster than it ever had. "But I can stop fighting it. I can accept it. No more catching cups. No more dodging puddles. No more warnings. I will see the future, and I will walk into it willingly. No paradox. No friction. No food for you." The static sound rose in pitch, becoming agitated, angry. "No, the static change is the sound of a cash register. Payment. The payment stops now," I declared. I felt a surge of power, the power of a cornered animal with nothing left to lose. "I'm cutting you off." I held up the brass button in my other hand. and I'm sending this back. I didn't know what I was doing, not really. It was a desperate gambit based on a half-baked theory, but I had to try. I had to fight back with the rules of this impossible game. I focused all my will, all my desperation, on the two objects in my hands. The watch, representing pure linear time, and the button, representing the glitch's intrusion into my world. I was trying to reset the connection, to use the inherent wrongness of this place against my tormentor. I pressed the cold brass button against the glass face of the ticking analog watch. The moment they touched, the world ended, not with a bang, but with a deafening silence. The creature's static hiss vanished. The hum of the control room died. The air, which had been vibrating with energy, became utterly still. And then, the sound rushed back in, but it was a different sound. It was the sound of the watch, its tiny ticking amplified 1,000,000 times, a rhythmic, mechanical heartbeat that filled the entire building. Tick, tock, tick, tock. The sound of pure, unadulterated, linear time reasserting its dominance. The static creature recoiled as if struck, its form convulsed violently. The shimmering distortion that composed its body began to unravel. The stolen voices screamed from within it, a cacophony of 1,000 broadcasts all playing at once, then fading. It was being torn apart by the simple, relentless logic of cause and effect. The creature let out one final, desperate burst of static, a sound of pure agony and rage. And in that final burst, I was hit with one last massive glitch: the vision. It wasn't 10 seconds. It was a lifetime. I saw flashes of a future I could now never have. I saw myself getting married. I saw myself holding a child. I saw myself growing old, my hair turning gray, sitting on a porch with a woman I loved. A normal life, a quiet life, a life free of glitches, free of fear. It was beautiful, and it was a gut punch of everything I was losing. Then the vision shifted. I saw the curator, the smiling man. He was no longer in a reflection. He was standing in a dark, empty room, and he was looking at a wall covered in photographs, hundreds of them. Each photo was of a different person, their faces frozen in moments of fear, confusion, or despair. They were his collection, his trophies, and in the center of the wall was an empty frame. He turned and looked directly at me, through the vision, through time itself. His smile was gone. His expression was one of cold, furious hunger. He knew I was escaping him. He knew I had broken his toy. He raised a finger and pointed, not at me, but at the empty frame on the wall, the present. I was on my knees in the control room, gasping for breath. The static creature was gone. The air was still. The only sound was the ticking of the analog watch in my hand. The brass button was gone, vanished. I had done it. I had severed the connection. The bell was no longer ringing. I was free. But the final vision, the curator's fury, the empty frame, it was a promise, a threat. He had lost his window, but he hadn't forgotten the face he had been watching. I wasn't his exhibit anymore. I was the one that got away. And a collector like him would never stop hunting. I stumbled out of the control room, out of Building C, and back into the sickly daylight of the static zone. The world felt different. Stable. Solid. I looked at my analog watch. The second hand was ticking normally, 1 second at a time, in a straight line. I walked to the oily puddle of water and looked at my reflection. It was just me, a tired, terrified man, his face smudged with dust. There was nothing behind me, nothing but the gray, overcast sky, and my reflection moved when I moved. No lag, no delay. The quiet was gone. I could hear the wind rustling the yellowed leaves on the trees. I could hear the distant cry of a bird. The sounds were muted, deadened by the strange acoustics of this place. But they were there. The world was making noise again. I walked back to my car, squeezed through the fence, and drove away. I didn't look back. As I hit the main road, I turned on the radio. A song was playing. It was loud and clear and wonderfully, beautifully normal. I drove for an hour, my hands gripping the steering wheel, tears of relief streaming down my face. I was free. I was normal again. Then, I glanced at the rearview mirror, and for a single heart-stopping second, I saw him. Not in the back seat, not a reflection. He was standing on the side of the highway, miles behind me. a tall, thin figure in a coat and hat. He wasn't smiling. He was just watching me go. Then he was gone. The connection was severed. The glitches were gone. But he knew where I was, and he could walk in the real world now, even if only for a moment. The game had changed. I wasn't the prey in the cage anymore. Now I was the one being hunted. Freedom, I discovered, is not a destination. It's a temporary state. For 2 years, I lived in a world of beautiful, blissful, linear time. The glitches were gone. The 10-second echo was silenced. I could have a conversation without my brain feeding me the replies in advance. I could pour a cup of coffee without bracing for a vision of it shattering. I was normal, but it was the normality of a man on a witness protection program. I was constantly looking over my shoulder, checking reflections out of habit, my heart seizing for a moment before I remembered that there was nothing there to see. I had escaped the cage, but the shadow of the zookeeper lingered. The final image of the curator, the smiling man, standing on the side of the highway, solid, real, and furious, was burned into my memory. I had severed the connection that made me a beacon, but in doing so, I had made myself something far more dangerous. A target. I moved. I quit my job at the library, citing personal reasons. Mr. Abernathy was surprisingly understanding, his eyes holding a flicker of concern that made me wonder what stories he might have heard. I left my apartment, leaving most of my belongings behind. I sold my car. I became a ghost, systematically erasing the life I had known. I took on a new name, moved to a small, anonymous town in a different state, and took a job that kept me away from reflective surfaces and digital technology. I became a gardener at a sprawling old botanical garden. I worked with soil, plants, and stone, things that were real, solid, and existed only in the present. My life found a new rhythm, dictated by the sun and the seasons. The work was physical, grounding. The constant low-level paranoia never truly left, but it faded into a background hum, a part of my new, quiet existence. I avoided mirrors. I owned no television, no computer. I read physical books and listened to a battery-powered radio. I was living an analog life in a digital world, a deliberate anachronism. For 2 years, it worked. There were no signs of him. No brass buttons, no scent of ozone, no impossible smiles in the periphery. I began to hope. I began to believe that maybe, just maybe, I had truly gotten away. That without the signal from my glitched perception to guide him, he couldn't find me in the vast, noisy ocean of humanity. I was wrong. He wasn't tracking a signal anymore. He was following a scent, the scent of the one that got away. It started, as it always did, with something small. I was at work, trimming the roses in the botanical garden's main conservatory. It was a huge, beautiful glass building, a palace of light and life. I was careful, as always, to avoid looking too closely at my own reflection in the panes of glass. But on this day, I was pruning a particularly overgrown bush near the corner of the building, and my gaze drifted to the reflection of the path behind me. For a fraction of a second, I saw him. Not the smiling man himself, but an echo of him. A distortion. A man walking down the path in my reflection stopped, his head turning to look directly at me, his face momentarily stretching into that impossibly wide, familiar grin before snapping back to normal. The real man on the path, a tourist with a camera, hadn't broken his stride. It was a glitch, not my glitch, a glitch in the world. My blood ran cold for the first time in 2 years. I dropped my pruning shears. The clatter on the stone path sounded unnaturally loud. It was a test, a probe. He had found me. He couldn't see through my eyes anymore, so he was learning to manipulate the world around me, to insert his echoes into my reality directly. I went home that day, the old familiar paranoia returning with a vengeance. I sat in my small, rented room, the silence no longer a comfort, but a canvas for my fear. I knew he wouldn't just appear. That wasn't his style. The curator, the collector, he enjoyed the performance. He enjoyed the hunt. The payoff structure had changed. He could no longer feed on the temporal friction I created. So now he would feed on my fear. The next day, the glitches began in earnest. They were different from before. They weren't previews of my own future. They were intrusions, edits to the present. I'd be reading a book, and for a split second, all the words on the page would be replaced with a single repeating phrase, "I see you." I'd look again, and the page would be normal. I'd be listening to the radio, and a song would be interrupted by a burst of static that whispered my real name. Alex, before the music resumed, he was leaving me notes, just like the thank you house. But these were not notes of gratitude. They were reminders that he was there, just on the other side of perception, and that the barrier was getting thinner. I knew I couldn't run. I had already tried that. He hadn't found me by tracking my credit cards or my social security number. He had found me by tracking the unique wound I had torn in the fabric of reality when I escaped him. I was a scar, and he was drawn to it. My only hope was to fight back. But how? I couldn't go back to the static zone. That was his home turf. I had to find a new weapon. My mind went back to the research I had done. The quiet spots. The places where time and perception were already broken. The static zone was one type, a loud, chaotic place of temporal noise. But Cassandra 27, in her last message, had mentioned going to a different kind of place. A place where perception got fuzzy, where time doesn't run straight. She had gone there to disconnect. What if she had the right idea, but the wrong method? She had tried to hide. What if I needed to do the opposite? What if I needed to find a place that could amplify my own unique abilities, not to hide, but to set a trap? My research began again, but this time I wasn't looking for a place of static. I was looking for a place of pure, focused time. I searched for legends of places with perfect echoes, places where sounds repeated without distortion. I looked for geological anomalies known for creating strange, resonant frequencies. I found a place. It was a geological formation known to locals as the Whispering Caves, but not for the same reason as the X-12 system. These caves, located in a remote part of Utah, were famous for a unique acoustic phenomenon. Due to their smooth parabolic walls and unique mineral composition, they didn't just echo sound, they preserved it. A word spoken in the central chamber would echo for hours, growing fainter and fainter, but never distorting. Locals claimed you could hear conversations from the day before, still whispering through the caverns. It was a place that held on to time, that recorded the past without twisting it. It was the antithesis of the static zone. It was a place of temporal purity, and I had a desperate, insane idea of how to use it. The curator hunted me through reflections. He existed in the space between the real and the mirrored. He was an echo. What would happen to an echo in a place that preserved sound perfectly? Could I trap him in his own reflection? It was a wild, desperate plan, but it was the only one I had. Getting to the Whispering Caves was a 3-day journey. I took a bus, then another, then hitched a ride with a trucker. The whole time, the glitches escalated. I saw the smiling man's reflection in the bus window, no longer just standing, but walking alongside the bus, keeping pace, his grin fixed and unwavering. The static on the trucker's radio whispered my name over and over. He was closing in. He knew I was making a move, and he was enjoying the chase. The caves were at the end of a long, dusty hiking trail. The entrance was a simple, dark opening at the base of a massive red rock formation. There were no fences, no warning signs. To the world, this was just a natural wonder. I stepped inside, my heart pounding. The air was cool and dry. I walked down a long, sloping passage that opened into the main chamber. It was beautiful. The walls were smooth, polished by millennia of wind, and they curved upward like the inside of a massive stone cathedral. I took a breath and spoke a single word. "Hello," the echo came back instantly. "Hello," perfect, clear. Then a second later, fainter. "Hello," then fainter still. "Hello." The word went on, a cascade of perfect copies, a waterfall of sound slowly fading into silence. This was the place. I had brought a few things with me. A powerful battery-operated lantern, a small, high-quality digital audio recorder, and a large, polished steel mirror, about 3 feet by 2 feet, carefully wrapped in blankets in my backpack. My plan was simple and probably insane. I was going to create a trap, a perceptual feedback loop. I set up the mirror in the center of the chamber, leaning it against a rock so that it faced the entrance passage. I placed the lantern beside it, its powerful beam aimed at the same spot. I turned on the audio recorder and set it to record. Then, I waited. I sat in the darkness for hours, listening to the echoes of my own movements fade into the deep silence of the cave. I was the bait. I had come to his hunting ground, and now I was calling him out. As night fell outside, the darkness in the cave became absolute. It was then that I felt a change in the air, a familiar cold, a faint smell of ozone. He was here. I turned on the lantern. Its powerful beam shot across the chamber, illuminating the entrance passage in a brilliant cone of light. I stood up and walked into the beam of light, positioning myself directly between the lantern and the mirror. My shadow stretched out long and dark behind me. I was the center of attention. "I know you're here," I said, my voice strong, amplified by the cave's strange acoustics. "I'm tired of running. Let's finish this," my voice echoed. "Finish this. Finish this. Finish this." I waited. Nothing happened. The cave was silent except for the fading echoes of my own voice. Had I been wrong? Was this all just a crazy, desperate fantasy? Then I saw it. In the polished steel mirror in front of me, my reflection stood, and behind my reflection, standing in the darkness just outside the lantern's beam, was the smiling man. He was clearer than I had ever seen him. Even in the static zone, the pure acoustics of this place, its lack of temporal noise, seemed to give him a stronger foothold. He was tall, dressed in a long, dark coat from the early 20th century. His face was pale and indistinct, all except for the slash of his smile. He took a step forward, into the edge of the lantern's light, and for the first time I saw his eyes. They were not eyes. They were just dark, empty pits, voids that seemed to drink the light. This was the advanced psychology of the hunt. He was revealing himself, banking on my fear to paralyze me. I didn't flinch. I had a role to play. "There you are," I said, my voice calm. "The curator," the echo answered. "The curator? The curator. The curator?" He tilted his head, his smile unwavering. He took another step, his form solidifying. He was crossing over, using the mirror as his gateway. Now. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my secret weapon. It wasn't a watch or a button. It was something I had taken from the botanical garden. A small, highly polished silver garden trowel. Its curved concave surface was a perfect distorting mirror. As the curator took another step, fully entering the beam of light, I held up the trowel, angling its reflective surface. I wasn't looking at him directly. I was looking at his reflection in the large steel mirror, and I used the trowel to reflect the image from the large mirror. Back into the large mirror, I created a feedback loop, a reflection of a reflection of a reflection, an infinite regression. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. The curator, this entity that existed in the space between reality and reflection, was caught in an infinite loop of his own image. His form, which had been solidifying, exploded into 1,000 flickering, static-filled images in the mirror. The cave, which had been preserving sound, was now preserving and amplifying this visual paradox. The air crackled with energy. The low hum returned, but it was a shriek now, a sound of pure technological agony. The curator in the mirror was screaming. Not a sound I could hear, but a visual scream. His smile was gone, replaced by a rictus of silent digital horror. His form was being torn apart, copied, reflected, and recopied at an infinite speed. He was trapped, an echo in a cave that never let echoes die. I had weaponized his own nature against him. I stood there, holding the trowel steady, my arm aching, as the entity in the mirror was shredded by infinity. The light from the lantern flickered. The audio recorder on the ground was emitting a high-pitched whine. Then, with a final silent implosion, the image in the mirror vanished. The shrieking hum stopped. The cave was silent. I looked at the mirror. It was just a mirror now. My own reflection stared back at me, pale and shaking. Behind me, there was nothing. He was gone. Trapped. An infinite echo in a cave of echoes. I packed my things, my body trembling with adrenaline and exhaustion. I took the mirror, the lantern, the recorder. I couldn't leave them. I couldn't risk anyone else finding this place, stumbling upon the prison I had created. As I was about to leave the main chamber, I noticed something on the ground where the curator had been standing. It wasn't a brass button. It was a photograph, a small black and white Polaroid. I picked it up. It was a picture of a woman with a kind smile, her hair in a 1970s style. She was standing in front of a house on a suburban street, Maple Street. It was my mother. And in the window of the house, behind her, barely visible, was the faint, smiling reflection of a tall man in a hat. The final, chilling piece of the puzzle fell into place. The developer, Alistair Finch, hadn't just found the quiet room. He had been a glitch himself. He had brought the curse to Maple Street. The tapes hadn't been an invitation. They had been an attempt to replicate his own power to spread the gift. And my father hadn't just sacrificed himself to close a door. He had taken the place of the original curator of that specific location. This wasn't a random affliction. It was a legacy. A virus passed down through proximity, through geography, through time. I had won the battle, but the war was so much bigger than I had ever imagined. I hadn't just been haunted. I had been chosen. I was a candidate to become a new curator. I walked out of the cave and into the dawn. The world was quiet, but it was a real quiet, a peaceful quiet. The glitches were gone. The smiling man was gone. I am free, but I am also a guardian now. I carry the knowledge, the memory of the glitches, of the curators, of the quiet, hungry places in the world. I am the outro strategy of my own story, the one who has to deliver the final warning. The 10-second future is gone, but now I see something else. I see the patterns. I see the quiet spots on the map. I see the reflections in the world that don't quite match up. I am no longer the one being hunted. Now, I am the hunter, and my collection has just begun. For 5 years, I was the hunter. The knowledge that had once been my curse became my weapon. I used the resources I had, the archives of the internet, the forgotten histories in dusty libraries, the network of urban explorers and paranormal, investigators who traffic in whispers and strange photographs to map the world's quiet spots. I became a cartographer of the abnormal. I never sought direct confrontation again. My battle with the curator in the whispering caves was a desperate 1-in-a-million gambit. A repeat performance would be suicide. Instead, I became a saboteur. I learned to identify the patterns, the environmental conditions that allowed the glitches to manifest more strongly. I would anonymously tip off environmental agencies about toxic spills near places like the Northwood plant, leading to them being fenced off and declared inaccessible. I would spread local folklore, creating new ghost stories and urban legends to scare people away from places where the veil was thin. I was a phantom fighting phantoms. I was putting up warning signs that only I could read. The world, for me, remained linear. The 10-second echo was gone, a phantom limb that only ached on quiet nights. I lived a solitary life, moving from town to town, never staying in one place long enough to form attachments. Attachments were anchors, and anchors could be used against me. The curator I had trapped was just one of many. His furious, hungry face, staring at the empty frame on his wall of trophies, was a constant reminder that I was not forgotten. I was an anomaly, an unsolved equation, and their kind, I learned, despises loose ends. I kept the Polaroid of my mother. It was the only photograph I had of her, of my old life. I kept it in a lead-lined box, a foolish, sentimental precaution against a threat that didn't operate on any physical level I understood. Sometimes, late at night, I would take it out and look at it. I would look at her kind, unsuspecting smile, and then I would look at the faint, almost invisible smudge in the window behind her, the reflection of the thing that had set my entire life on its terrible course. It was on the 5th anniversary of my freedom, a cold October night, that I noticed something new. I was in a cheap motel room in rural Nevada, studying maps of old mining tunnels rumored to cause temporal distortions. I had the Polaroid out, sitting on the desk beside me. As I glanced at it, I saw it. The smudge in the window behind my mother was darker, more defined. I picked up the photograph, my heart starting a slow, heavy drum. It wasn't a trick of the light. The image on the Polaroid, a photograph developed and fixed 30 years ago, was changing. The faint reflection of the smiling man was becoming clearer, more solid. It was as if he was slowly developing in the chemical emulsion, emerging from the past. I spent the entire night watching the photograph under a magnifying glass. The change was imperceptible moment to moment, but hour by hour it was undeniable. He was growing stronger within the image. The prison I had created for his colleague in the Whispering Caves had not weakened the others. It had only made them change their tactics. They couldn't reach me through my own perception anymore. So they were coming through my memories, through my past. A new, horrifying thought took root in my mind. What if the Polaroid wasn't just a picture? What if it was a door, a back door into my timeline, anchored to a moment of profound emotional significance? Over the next few weeks, my paranoia returned, but it was a colder, more intellectual fear. I was no longer just prey. I was a strategist in a game of impossible fourth-dimensional chess. I began to research the physics of photography, the chemistry of Polaroid film, the metaphysics of how a moment is captured. I read about the concept of quantum entanglement, the idea that two particles can be linked, their fates intertwined no matter the distance between them. What if a photograph, a captured moment of light, could be entangled with the moment it was taken? And if it could that connection be used as a conduit? The image on the Polaroid continued to develop. The curator's smile was now visible, sharp, hungry. He was looking directly out of the photograph, directly at me. I knew I had to destroy it. But the last time I had destroyed an artifact of their world, the VHS tapes, it had only made things worse. It had broken the lock. Destroying the Polaroid might sever this connection, or it might shatter the door completely, letting him step right through. I needed to understand the rules of this new attack. I fell back on my training as an archivist. I needed to find the source material. I needed to go back to Maple Street. The thought filled me with a dread so profound it was physically nauseating. But I had no choice. The battle had started there, and it had to end there. I drove back across the country, a ghost returning to his own haunting. The town had changed in the 7 years since I had fled. It was bigger, more built up. But as I turned onto Maple Street, a wave of cold nostalgia hit me. It was exactly the same. The same 14 houses in their perfect, placid rows. The same manicured lawns. The same unnerving, deep-seated quiet. The silence was different now. It wasn't the empty, draining silence from 1994. It was a respectful silence, a memorial silence. The street felt like a perfectly preserved museum exhibit, or a tomb. My old house, number 7, had new owners, a young family. I watched from my car as their children played on the lawn, their laughter sounding strangely muted, as if the street itself was still absorbing the noise. My destination was number 1. The old Finch house, the epicenter. It was still abandoned, sealed, a dark monument at the entrance to the cul-de-sac. I had to get back inside. I had to find Alistair Finch's journals, his research. The answer had to be there. Breaking in was easier this time. I was no longer a frightened 12-year-old. I was a man with a mission. I slipped in through the same ground floor window, the wood groaning in protest. The house was just as I remembered it. The predatory silence, the feeling of being watched. I made my way to the study, my flashlight cutting through the gloom. The desk was still there, the bookshelves still lined with their strange, leather-bound volumes. But the journal, the one my father had read from, was gone. Panic flared in my chest. Had Finch Jr. taken it? Had someone else been here? I frantically searched the desk, the shelves. Nothing. Then my light fell upon a section of the bookshelf that looked different. The books there were newer, their spines unbroken. They were not Alistair Finch's occult texts. They were modern physics textbooks, quantum mechanics, string theory, theoretical chronology, and tucked between them was a single, slim, black leather-bound notebook. It was not old and dusty. It was new. I opened it. The handwriting was elegant, precise, and chillingly familiar. It was the same script I had seen on the note made of skin from the thank you house all those years ago. This was not Alistair Finch's journal. This was the curator's. He had left it for me. This was the next move in the game. My hands shaking, I began to read. It was not a diary. It was a lab notebook, a research journal. And the subject of the research was me. He wrote about me not as a person, but as Subject 7 Alpha, the Maple Street anomaly. He detailed the onset of the perceptual echo with cold, clinical precision. He described my attempts to fight back, my discovery of the forum, my journey to the static zone, all from his perspective. He called my victory in the control room a spontaneous, uncontrolled severance of the primary observation conduit. He wrote about his colleague, the one I had trapped in the Whispering Caves, referring to the incident as a containment failure and my method as a novel use of recursive perceptual feedback. He seemed more impressed than angry. The final entries were about his new approach. Subject: 7 Alpha has proven resistant to direct perceptual intrusion. The primary conduit remains severed. However, the subject retains a strong emotional temporal anchor to the initial manifestation point, Maple Street, 1994. A secondary conduit has been established via a preserved photochemical artifact, Polaroid, circa 1987. The artifact is proving to be a viable, albeit slow, vector. The image is developing, solidifying its connection to the subject's present timeline. The goal is no longer observation or sustenance. The goal is retrieval. The subject's unique properties, its resistance, its ingenuity, make it a high-value candidate for collection and study. The final stage requires the subject to return to the epicenter, the anchor point. His presence here will amplify the artifact's connection, allowing for a full temporal translocation. He cannot resist the pull of the past. He will come. The trap is set. The empty frame is waiting. I dropped the journal on the desk. It was all a trap. My entire journey back here, my desperate search for answers, he had orchestrated all of it. He had led me here to this room, the place where the veil was thinnest, to complete his experiment. As if on cue, I felt a burning sensation in my pocket. I pulled out the Polaroid. It was hot to the touch, and the image was now perfectly, terrifyingly clear. The curator was no longer a smudge. He was a fully formed figure standing behind my mother, his hand resting on her shoulder. His smile was a triumphant, predatory slash. And his eyes, those dark, empty pits, were staring directly at me. The photograph was no longer a window. It was a door, and it was opening. The air in the study grew cold. The familiar smell of ozone filled the room. I looked up from the photograph. Standing in the center of the room where my father had once opened the portal to the quiet room, a figure was beginning to form, a shimmering, static-filled distortion just like the one in the Northwood plant. But this one was darker, sharper. It coalesced, solidified, and took the form of the tall man in the long, dark coat and the wide-brimmed hat. The curator. He was here. Solid. Real. He had crossed over. He looked around the room, a connoisseur admiring a piece of art. Then his dark, empty eyes settled on me. He smiled his impossible smile. Subject 7 Alpha, he said. His voice was not a collage of static this time. It was a smooth, deep, cultured baritone. The voice of a collector who has just acquired his most prized possession. Thank you for coming. Your cooperation has been exemplary. I was frozen, not with fear, but with a strange, cold clarity. The game was over. I had been outplayed from the very beginning. What happens now? I asked, my voice a hollow whisper. Now, the curator said, taking a step toward me. The collection is complete. He raised his hand. It was long and pale, his fingers like a surgeon's scalpels. He reached out not to grab me, but to simply touch my forehead. Don't worry, he said, his smile widening. It's not an end. It's an archival process. You'll be perfectly preserved. A perfect eternal echo. The centerpiece of my collection. His finger was an inch from my skin. I could feel the cold radiating from it, a cold that felt like the absence of time itself. This was it, the final move. Checkmate. But in that final moment, I remembered my father. I remembered his sacrifice. He hadn't just closed a door. He had become a guardian. He had integrated with the quiet room, becoming its warden. And I remembered the final entry in the curator's journal. The empty frame is waiting. An idea, a final desperate gambit, sparked in my mind. The curator thought he was collecting me. But what if a collection needs a place to be stored? What if an archivist needs an archive? As his finger was about to touch me, I didn't flinch. I didn't run. I looked him in his empty eyes and spoke a single, clear sentence. The quiet room is empty. It needs a new occupant. The curator paused. His finger stopped, a millimeter from my skin. His smile faltered for the first time. A flicker of something, confusion, interest, passed through his dark eyes. The chamber of subtraction, he whispered. The name a soft hiss. The Finch anomaly. It was sealed. The door was sealed, I corrected him. But the guardian of the door is gone. My father. His echo has faded. It's just an empty room now. A perfect, silent, eternal prison. A frame waiting for a picture. I was bluffing. I had no idea if my father's presence had faded. But I was betting on the curator's nature. His defining trait. His insatiable need to collect. I had just offered him the ultimate prize. Not just a single, unique specimen, but the entire archive. A pocket dimension. A place of absolute silence. The perfect gallery for his collection of stolen moments and captured souls. His smile returned, but it was different now. It was no longer the smile of a predator. It was the smile of a collector who has just stumbled upon the find of a lifetime. "Show me," he commanded. I closed my eyes. I reached deep inside myself, to the memory of that night in this very room. I remembered the hum. I remembered the shimmering air. I remembered my father, turning to face the hole in reality. I focused on that memory, on the feeling of the veil tearing. I didn't have Alistair Finch's knowledge or my father's love to power it, but I had something else. I had the scar, the wound in time that the curator himself had created. I was a living key. I began to hum the low single note. The air in the room grew cold. The space in front of me began to shimmer. The quiet room was opening. I could see it. The bare walls, the wooden chair. It was just as I remembered it. Empty. Silent. Waiting. The curator stared into the portal, his empty eyes wide with what I can only describe as avarice. He took a step toward it, mesmerized. "Perfect," he breathed. "Absolutely perfect." He turned to me one last time. "A clever move, Subject 7 Alpha, to offer the archivist the ultimate archive. I accept." He turned his back on me and stepped through the portal, into the quiet room. He walked to the center, stood before the chair, and spread his arms wide. A king taking possession of his new kingdom. I didn't hesitate. "The room is yours," I whispered. "And you are its." I slammed the door shut. I didn't do it with a hum or a ritual. I did it with the only weapon I had left. I took the Polaroid of my mother, the curator's own conduit, his back door into my world, and I threw it into the portal. The moment the photograph crossed the threshold, the portal imploded. The image of the quiet room collapsed in on itself with a sound like 1,000 VHS tapes being erased at once. A wave of force threw me back against the bookshelf, and then silence. A true, final silence. The air in the room was normal. The cold was gone. The smell of ozone was gone. I was alone. Truly alone. I had done it. I had traded one monster for another. I had given the quiet room a new, willing occupant. A curator for a prison of silence. He had his perfect collection, and the collection had him. An eternal silent feedback loop. I stood up, my body aching. I looked at the spot where the portal had been. There was nothing there, just the dusty floor of an old abandoned study. My story was over. The glitches were gone. The hunter was caged. I am an old man now. I live a quiet life. I never went back to being an archivist. I have had enough of the past. I live in the present. A simple, linear, beautiful present. 1 second at a time. But sometimes on quiet nights when the world is still, I think about him. The curator, trapped forever in his perfect silent gallery. And I wonder, does he still smile? Does he admire his collection of stolen souls? And I wonder about the empty frame on his wall. The one that was meant for me, is it still empty? Or in that place of absolute silence, has he finally found a way to fill it? Has he learned to create his own echoes? And is one of them me? A perfect silent copy, sitting in a quiet room, waiting for the day the door opens again. I don't know, and I don't want to. Some doors are better left closed, and some echoes are better left unheard. The story should end there. It's a good ending, isn't it? The hero, scarred but victorious, finds a new purpose. The monster is caged. The world is safe. It's a clean, satisfying narrative. I have spent the last 5 years believing that narrative. I have clung to it like a life raft, but the universe doesn't care for clean narratives. It operates on rules of cause and effect that are far colder and more impartial than any story. I won the battle in the Whispering Caves, but the war had already been lost, long before I even knew I was a soldier. I didn't understand it until last night. Now I am recording this final log, not as a warning, not as a testimony, but as a confession. A suicide note for a man who is already dead, After I trapped the curator, I dedicated my life to becoming a ghost watcher, a guardian against the static. I thought my vigilance was a choice, a purpose I had forged from my trauma. I now know it was just a symptom. It began as it always does, with something small. A month ago, I was sitting in my Spartan apartment reading. I reached for my glass of water and my hand knocked against it, sending it tipping over the edge of the table. I watched it fall. I watched it shatter on the floor, and I felt nothing. There was no 10-second preview, no premonition, no glitch, just a simple, clumsy accident. For the first time in 7 years, I had been surprised by the immediate future. A wave of pure, unadulterated joy washed over me. It was truly over. The last lingering connection, the last scar on my perception had finally healed. I was completely blessedly normal. I laughed as I cleaned up the broken glass, the sound echoing in my small, empty apartment. The next day, the normal accidents continued. I tripped on a loose paving stone. I bumped into someone on the street. Minor, everyday stumbles that I had been immune to for years. Each one was a small celebration, a confirmation of my restored humanity. But then a new phenomenon began. It was subtle, easy to dismiss. I would be walking in the garden at work, and I would hear a bird sing its song. Then, a few moments later, as I continued walking, I would remember the bird singing, but the memory would be so vivid, so complete. It felt like I was hearing it for the first time, right then. It was like my own memory was on a slight delay. The incidents grew more frequent, more noticeable. I would have a conversation with my landlord, and as I walked away, I would perfectly recall his words, but the memory would feel more real, more present than the actual conversation had. I was experiencing my own life as a series of intensely vivid, slightly delayed reruns. I tried to ignore it. I told myself it was a psychological aftereffect of my trauma, my brain rewiring itself after years of living with the 10-second echo. But the feeling of temporal dissonance, the sensation of being out of sync with myself, grew stronger every day. The breaking point came last night. After years of avoidance, I decided it was time to face my old fear head-on. I needed to prove to myself once and for all that I was free. I bought a mirror, a simple full-length mirror. I brought it back to my apartment and leaned it against the wall. My heart was pounding, a conditioned response from years of terror. I stood before it, took a deep breath, and looked at my own reflection. It was just me, a man in his early 30s, with more gray in his hair than he should have, and eyes that held a permanent, haunted quality. But there was nothing behind me, nothing in the reflection that wasn't in the room. I smiled, a real, genuine smile. My reflection smiled back, perfectly in sync. I raised my right hand. My reflection raised its right hand. I took a step to the left. My reflection took a step to the left. It was over. The mirror was just a mirror. The curator was gone. I was free. The relief was so profound, I felt lightheaded. I stood there for a long time just looking at myself, reacquainting myself with my own face, my own reality. I decided to perform one final test. A test of the past, not the future. I would raise my hand, hold it for a few seconds, and then lower it, and watch to make sure the memory of the action felt correct, that there was no lag. I raised my right hand. My reflection did not move. I froze, my hand held aloft. My reflection stared back at me, its hand remaining by its side. It was perfectly still. Its expression was neutral. 1 second, 2, 3. My mind reeled. What is this? A new trick? 4 seconds. 5. 6. The man in the mirror remained motionless. 7. 8. 9. And on the 10th second, my reflection raised its right hand. A scream died in my throat. It wasn't a preview. It was a delay, a lag. My reflection was living 10 seconds in my past. It was a perfect, high-fidelity recording of my own life played back on a 10-second loop. I lowered my hand in horror. My reflection kept its hand raised. I watched, mesmerized, for 10 agonizing seconds. Then my reflection lowered its hand. I stumbled back from the mirror, my mind shattering. The static zone. The feedback loop I created in the whispering caves. I hadn't just severed the connection. I had absorbed the static. I had become the broken place. My own perception of time was now permanently fractured. I wasn't seeing the future anymore. I was seeing the present, but I was experiencing it 10 seconds late. My consciousness was trapped in a prison of the immediate past, forced to watch a recording of a life I was no longer truly living. The man I saw in the mirror, the one who raised his hand instantly, was the real me, the prime me, the one living in the true now, the I that is thinking, the I that is feeling this horror, the I that is narrating this story. I am the echo. The 10-second glitch was never a window into the future. It was the gap, the growing distance between my body and my consciousness. When the curator was connected to me, his advanced perception filled that gap, feeding me images from the future to feast on the paradox. But when I severed his connection, the gap remained. And now, there is nothing to fill it but the past. I am a ghost in my own machine, a passenger in a body I can no longer control in real time. I am living a memory. I am writing this now, but the hand that holds the pen is moving 10 seconds ahead of my conscious thought. I am speaking these words into a recorder, but the lips that form them are moving in a future I can only experience as a memory. The final, terrible truth has settled upon me. The story I have been telling you, this entire testimony, it is not the story of a man who was haunted. It is the story of an echo trying to understand its own origin. I have been piecing together the memories of my host, the man in the mirror, to understand how I came to be. This entire narrative has been my own search for my genesis. The curator didn't want to collect Alex. He wanted to collect the unique phenomenon that was me, the stable, sentient echo. I look in the mirror now. I see the body, the vessel. I think the thought, raise your hand. The hand goes up instantly. But my consciousness, the I that is speaking to you, remains perfectly still. I am a silent observer, trapped behind the eyes of a man who doesn't even know I'm here. 10 seconds later, my perception catches up. I experience the memory of raising the hand. It feels real. It feels like I did it, but it's a lie. A perfect, seamless echo. The curator is gone. But he won. He didn't get to put me in his collection, but he succeeded in creating his masterpiece. A self-aware echo, permanently detached from its source. A ghost that doesn't know it's dead until now. I am the final echo. The story is complete. I finally understand what I am. And now, for the first time in my existence, I have nothing left to remember. There is only the silence of the next 10 seconds, and the one after that, and the one after that. An eternity of waiting for a past that has already happened. The empty frame on the curator's wall. It was never meant for the man. It was meant for the echo. It was meant for me. My name is Dr. Eris Thorne. I am the senior analyst for the Department of Metaphysical Quarantine, Division of Temporal Anomalies. The man you know as Leo, the geologist from the X-12 incident, is a colleague of mine. He was the one who first flagged this case. The file is designated Case 77B, the Perceptual Echo. The subject's name was Alex, the man you have been listening to. His story, as you heard it, is largely accurate. We have his audio logs, his research, the physical evidence. We have the curator's journal. We have the Polaroid. We also have the mirror. When local law enforcement responded to a wellness check at Alex's last known address, they found him deceased. The official cause of death was ruled inconclusive, but the scene was clean, too clean. He was lying on the floor of his apartment. In his hand, a digital audio recorder was still clutched, its battery dead. In front of him, a full-length mirror was shattered, a spider web of cracks radiating from a central point. There was no impact object. The police report noted, with some confusion, that the mirror appeared to have broken from the inside out. The case was flagged by our department due to keywords in the initial report: temporal distortion, auditory hallucinations, unexplained phenomena. It was assigned to me. I have spent the last 6 months of my life living inside Alex's story. I have listened to his audio logs hundreds of times. I have cross-referenced his experiences with dozens of other cases. The thank you notes from Ashwood Drive, the quiet room of Maple Street, the resonant echoes of the Whispering Caves. Alex, in his desperate, brilliant struggle, managed to connect dots that our entire department had been staring at for 50 years. He didn't just experience an anomaly, he mapped its ecosystem. His final theory was correct. He was a sentient echo, a consciousness trapped 10 seconds in the past of its own body. A ghost living in a shell it could no longer pilot in real time. His final act, the confrontation in the mirror, was, from his perspective, a logical and tragic conclusion. He believed he was an echo, and he chose to silence himself. We have the final recording. We have the 10 seconds of absolute silence. We have the soft, final sound of his body falling to the floor. The story should end there. A tragedy, but a contained one. The echo is gone. The primary anomaly, the curator, is trapped. The case is closed, but there is one detail that doesn't fit. One piece of data that I could not reconcile. The sound of the mirror shattering. It's not on the recording. Alex's final log ends with the sound of his body falling. There is no glass breaking. Yet, when the police arrived, the mirror was shattered. This discrepancy has kept me awake for months. What happened in the moments after the echo silenced itself? Last night, I found the answer. Our audio forensics team ran a deep spectral analysis on the final recording. They filtered out the ambient room tone, the electronic hum of the recorder, everything. They isolated the 10 seconds of silence between Alex's last word and the sound of his fall. It wasn't silent. Buried deep beneath the noise floor, almost subliminal, was a sound. A single, pure, resonant frequency. It was a clean, unwavering tone, almost like a tuning fork. We didn't recognize it at first. It didn't match any known temporal or paranormal signature in our database. Then, on a hunch, I asked the team to do something unconventional. I asked them to treat the 10-second tone not as a sound, but as a data file, a carrier wave. We ran it through a decryption algorithm, one designed to decode signals embedded in white noise, and we found it. A message. It wasn't from Alex, it wasn't from the curator, it was from the body. The prime Alex. The man in the mirror. The man who, for the last 7 years of his life, had been living without a conscious echo, without the ghost in the machine that we all possess. He had been an automaton, a vessel going through the motions, his consciousness replaced by a 10-second memory loop. He was, for all intents and purposes, an empty frame. And in the 10 seconds after his echo committed suicide, in the brief window before his body finally shut down, something else stepped in, something that had been waiting patiently. The message was a single sentence, spoken in a voice that was calm, ancient, and filled with a terrible, patient hunger. It was not Alex's voice. It was the voice of the thing that had been watching the curator, just as the curator had been watching Alex, the predator of the predator. The message said, "The vessel is empty. The frame is mine. The collection has a new archivist." The mirror didn't shatter because of a paradox. It shattered because a new, far older consciousness took possession of Alex's body, and in that moment of entry, it looked at its own reflection for the first time. The mirror broke under the strain of trying to reflect something that was not meant to exist in our reality. Alex didn't win. He didn't trap the monster. He was the key. He was the bait in a trap set by one cosmic entity to capture another. He was a pawn in a game so vast, he never even saw the real players. His entire struggle, his victory, his sacrifice, it was all just the turning of a key in a lock. He cleared the house of one ghost so that another, more powerful one could move in. We have sealed his apartment. The entire building is now under permanent quarantine, designated Site 77. We tell the world it's a chemical leak, an asbestos problem. The usual lies, but we know the truth. The thing that was once Alex is still in there. We have thermal and biosignature readings. It doesn't eat. It doesn't sleep. It just sits in the dark in front of the shattered pieces of the mirror, and it waits. We don't know what it's waiting for, but we have a theory. The curator collected echoes, moments, souls. This new entity, this archivist, we believe it collects stories, and it has just acquired the story of Alex. A perfect, complete narrative of struggle and sacrifice. A story it can now use as a lure. This broadcast, this very story you have been listening to, is now a part of that collection. By listening, you have become a part of the archive. We are broadcasting this message as a final, desperate measure, a quarantine protocol. We need you to know. We need you to be aware. The story of the man who could see 10 seconds into the future is no longer just a story. It is a key. It is an invitation. Do not seek out quiet spots. Do not investigate strange reflections. Do not try to find the Whispering Caves or the Northwood plant. Forget this story. Erase it from your memory because the archivist is listening, and it is hungry for new stories, and it has just learned yours. A fascinating narrative, isn't it? Full of struggle, hope, and despair. A perfect addition. Thank you for listening so intently. Your attention has been noted. Your story has been archived. Now, what will your echo be?